When the emergency room doctors called my parents to tell them my heart had stopped beating, they sent the call to voicemail. They were not in a meeting. They were not in church. They were sipping vintage champagne in first class, on their way to a Parisian vacation that was supposed to be my graduation gift. Instead of rushing to my bedside, my sister tagged me in a photo captioned "Finally free from drama." I laid there hooked to machines, realizing that my death would have been nothing more than an inconvenience to their travel itinerary. My name is Maya Vance, and at 29 years old, I learned that being the perfect daughter does not buy you love, it only buys you a hospital bed. Before I tell you how I made them regret every single mile of that flight, I want to know where you are watching from. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been the one doing all the work while everyone else takes the credit. The auditorium at the University of Chicago was vibrating with applause, a sound that should have felt like a triumph. 3,000 people were on their feet. My name echoed through the massive hall, followed by the distinction that should have made my chest swell with pride. Maya Vance, Master of Science in Actuarial Science, graduating with a perfect 4.0 GPA. I was the youngest African-American woman in the department's history to achieve this. But as I stood up from my seat in the front row, I did not feel pride. I felt gravity pulling at me with a force that seemed personal. My legs were heavy like they were filled with wet cement. My vision was swimming, the bright stage lights fracturing into painful halos of white and gold. I had not slept in 72 hours, not a single wink. While my classmates were celebrating the end of finals week with parties and dinners, I had been locked in my apartment staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. My father, Desmond Vance, a man whom the community revered as a pillar of moral fortitude, had called me 3 days prior. He did not call to wish me luck on my thesis defense. He called because he had made a mess of the family company's quarterly tax filings. "Maya, fix it," he had barked into the phone. "If the IRS audits us, it is on your head. I have a reputation to uphold." So I did what I was trained to do. I fixed it. I balanced the books, hid his negligence, and submitted the files at 4 in the morning, just hours before I had to put on my cap and gown. Now, walking toward the dean to accept my diploma, that exhaustion was coming to collect its debt. I forced a smile, the same practiced smile I had worn for 29 years, to hide the cracks in our perfect family image. I looked down at the VIP section in the front row. I had reserved 4 seats months ago. They were the best seats in the house, right in the center. I saw the little white cards taped to the velvet cushions. Desmond Vance. Patricia Vance. But the seats were empty. They were glaringly, painfully empty. A wave of cold washed over me, instantly replaced by a searing heat in my chest. They did not come. After all the promises after I broke my back to save his company again, they did not even show up. The dean was holding out his hand, his mouth moving, but the sound had turned into a high-pitched whine, like a mosquito buzzing in my ear. I reached out to take the diploma, but my fingers would not close. The world tilted violently to the left. I heard a gasp from the crowd, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a vacuum. Then the floor rushed up to meet me. The impact was hard. I felt my cheekbone collide with the polished wood of the stage, but the pain felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I was lying on my side, staring at the shoes of the dean. Chaos erupted. People were screaming. I tried to push myself up to tell them I was fine, to apologize for causing a scene, because that is what I was conditioned to do. Apologize for taking up space. But my body was paralyzed. My heart was fluttering in my chest like a trapped bird, beating so fast it hurt, and then skipping, pausing, struggling to restart. Someone turned me over. It was a paramedic, or maybe a campus nurse. Her face was blurry. "Give her air," she shouted. Her hands were on my neck, checking for a pulse. I could feel the frantic energy around me, the sheer panic of the faculty. Then a sound cut through the noise. It was a digital marimba ringtone. My phone. It had fallen out of my pocket when I collapsed, and was lying on the stage floor screen, lighting up. The nurse grabbed it. I saw her eyes widen as she read the caller ID. "It says Dad," she announced, looking relieved. She swiped the green button and put it on speaker, holding it close to my ear, assuming his voice would comfort me. "Thank God," she said breathlessly. "Sir, your daughter has just collapsed on stage." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her to hang up, but I could only let out a weak wheeze. My father's voice boomed through the tiny speaker, amplified by the silence of the people standing near me. He sounded annoyed. The background noise behind him was the distinct hum of an airport terminal and the clinking of glasses. "Maya, finally," he snapped. "Why are you not answering? I have been refreshing my email for 10 minutes. Did you send the final confirmation number for the tax filing? We are about to board and the service is spotty." The nurse froze. She looked at the phone, then at me, confusion written all over her face. "Sir," she stammered. "Sir, listen to me. Maya is in a medical emergency. She is unresponsive. We are calling an ambulance." There was a pause on the other end. For a fleeting second, I thought, this is it. This is the moment he realizes. This is the moment he becomes a father. Then my mother's voice cut in from the background. "Patricia!" She sounded tipsy and irritated. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Desmond. She is just being dramatic again because we missed the ceremony. Tell her to stop acting out. We have to go. They are calling our group." My father sighed, a sound of deep exasperation. "Maya, stop this nonsense. Send the file immediately. If I land in Paris and that confirmation is not in my inbox, do not bother coming home." Click. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than the unconsciousness dragging me down. The nurse stared at the phone in her hand, her mouth slightly open. She looked down at me, and for the first time I saw pity in a stranger's eyes that hurt more than the fall. She knew. In 10 seconds she had learned everything there was to know about the Vance family. My vision began to tunnel, black edges creeping in until all I could see was the harsh overhead lights. My heart gave one last painful thud, a protest against the cruelty it had just witnessed, and then it simply stopped fighting. The last thing I heard was not a voice of comfort, but the mechanical alarm of a defibrillator charging up and the nurse shouting code blue, "We are losing her." As the darkness swallowed me whole, I did not pray to live. I prayed that if I woke up, I would not be the same daughter who fell on that stage. I prayed that the Maya who tolerated this abuse would die right here on this floor, so a new one could rise. And as the electric shock jolted my body, I made a silent vow. If I survive this, they will pay. The white noise of the hospital room was the first thing to welcome me back to the land of the living. It was not the warm voice of a mother or the concerned touch of a father. It was just the rhythmic, mechanical beeping of a heart monitor and the sterile hum of the air conditioning. I blinked my eyes open, expecting to see balloons or flowers, or perhaps my parents sitting in the uncomfortable guest chairs looking guilty for missing my big moment. But as my vision cleared, the reality of the room settled in like a heavy fog. The chairs were empty. The bedside table was bare, save for a plastic pitcher of lukewarm water and my cracked phone. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like it had been hollowed out. A nurse walked in a moment later. She was young, maybe my age, with braids pulled back into a tight bun. She checked my IV drip with professional efficiency, but she refused to make eye contact. That was the first sign. In my line of work as an actuary, I look for patterns, and the pattern of avoidance usually means bad news. I asked her how long I had been out. 2 days, she said softly, still looking at the plastic tubing. You had a severe cardiac event brought on by extreme exhaustion and stress. Your heart stopped for 10 seconds, Maya. We had to resuscitate you. 2 days. I had lost 2 whole days. I asked the question that I already knew the answer to. Has anyone been here? Did my parents come back from the airport? The nurse finally looked at me, and the pity in her dark eyes was more painful than the defibrillator shocks must have been. No one has visited, she said. We tried calling the emergency contacts on file, but they went straight to voicemail. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Of course. Why would they turn around? A daughter in a coma is just baggage, a delay. I reached for my phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, a spiderweb fracture running right through the center. I unlocked it, bracing myself for missed calls or frantic texts. There were none. Instead, my notification center was cluttered with social media alerts. One stood out immediately. It was from Instagram. Ebony Vance tagged you in a post. My thumb hovered over the notification. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room and go back to sleep. But the masochistic part of me, the part that needed to calculate the exact probability of their cruelty, pressed the screen. The image loaded slowly on the hospital Wi-Fi. When it finally popped up, the air left my lungs. It was a selfie taken in the first-class cabin of an Air France flight. The lighting was golden, flattering their already polished faces. My mother, Patricia, was holding a flute of what looked like Dom Perignon, her smile tight and practiced. My father, Desmond, was wearing his silk eye mask pushed up on his forehead, looking relaxed and wealthy. Ebony was in the center, blowing a kiss to the camera. But it was the person sitting in the window seat next to her that made my blood run cold. It was Connor, my unemployed gambling addict brother-in-law. He was sitting in the seat that was explicitly reserved for me. He was drinking the champagne that was supposed to toast my master degree. I scrolled down to the caption, and that is when something inside me snapped. It read simply, "Family trip to Paris. No stress, no drama. Finally free from negativity. Enjoying the VIP life with the real ones. Negativity. That is what they called me. My medical emergency, my heart stopping on a stage in front of 3,000 people, was just negativity to them. It was drama. I looked at the timestamp. This was posted 4 hours ago. That meant they posted this while I was lying in this bed hooked up to machines, unsure if I would wake up with brain damage. They knew. The nurse had told them. And their response was to fly across the ocean and celebrate their freedom from me. I zoomed in on Connor's wrist. He was wearing a new Rolex. A Submariner. I recognized it because I knew the price tag. That watch cost $12,000. The exact amount of the graduation gift money my grandfather had earmarked for me, which was supposed to be in the family safe. They had not just taken my seat. They had liquidated my assets to upgrade a man who was actively draining the company I saved. The door opened again, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. This time it was not a nurse. It was a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as the hospital billing administrator. She looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Vance, I am glad to see you are awake," she said, clutching the clipboard to her chest. "We have a bit of a situation with the billing. We tried to process the admission deposit and the initial fees for the ICU stay, but the card on file was declined." I frowned. That was impossible. I handed them my platinum card when I was admitted, or rather, it was in my wallet. That card had a $50,000 limit. I told her to run it again. She shook her head. "We did 3 times. The bank says the card has been reported lost or stolen by the primary account holder. It has been frozen." The room spun. My parents were the primary account holders. It was a joint family account that I managed, but they owned. They had frozen my access. They had cut me off. They were in Paris spending my money, and they had left me here barely alive with no way to pay for the machines keeping me breathing. They did not just abandon me. They tried to financially bury me while I was physically incapacitated. I looked at the administrator. "How much is the bill?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. She turned the clipboard around. The number at the bottom was $42,000. I stared at the number. Then I stared at the picture of my family on my phone raising their glasses to a drama-free life. I handed the clipboard back to her. "Do not worry," I said, and my voice sounded different now. It sounded like the voice of the person who cleaned up their messes for a decade. It sounded like a forensic auditor. "Run the card one more time in exactly 1 hour. I promise you it will go through. And when it does, I want you to charge everything. The private room, the specialized care. Charge it all." Because I was about to log into the mainframe. I was about to use the backdoor access code my grandfather gave me years ago. If they wanted to report the card stolen, I would give them a real theft to worry about. I was done being the victim. As I pulled my laptop out of my bag, ignoring the pain in my chest, I knew one thing for certain. The Maya who begged for their love died on that stage. The Maya who woke up was coming for everything they had. The hospital room at 2 in the morning was a special kind of lonely. The only light came from the parking lot street lamps outside, filtering through the blinds, casting long prison bar shadows across my bed. I was still fuming from the Instagram photo, my heart rate monitor spiking every time I pictured Connor sipping my champagne. I was plotting, calculating, trying to figure out how to access the company servers without my phone, when I heard a low mechanical hum approaching my door. I assumed it was the floor polisher, or perhaps a medication cart, so I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. The door creaked open. The humming sound entered the room, followed by the soft click of the door latching shut. "Open your eyes, Maya. We do not have much time." The voice was deep, gravelly, and commanded absolute authority. It was a voice I had not heard in years. My eyes snapped open. Sitting in his motorized wheelchair at the foot of my bed was Grandpa Elijah. But he was not the drooling, confused old man my parents liked to parade around at church fundraisers to show how charitable they were. The man in front of me was wearing a three-piece wool suit, a silk pocket square, and his eyes were sharp, clear, and burning with intelligence. Standing beside him, holding a leather briefcase, was Mr. Sterling, his personal attorney from the days when Vance Enterprises actually meant something. "Grandpa?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "I thought you were senile." He finished for me, a dry smile touching his lips. "That is what Desmond and Patricia want everyone to believe. It is easier to steal from a man who cannot remember his own name. But I remember everything, Maya, including the fact that you are the only person in this family with a brain, even if you do let them treat you like a doormat." He tapped the armrest of his chair and drove closer to my bedside. Mr. Sterling stepped forward and placed a thick file on my tray table. "They are not just on vacation," Maya Grandpa said, his face hardening. "Paris is not a celebration. It is an escape route." I frowned, trying to sit up despite the ache in my chest. "What do you mean, running?" "They have return tickets." I saw the itinerary. "They have return tickets to throw off the scent," Mr. Sterling explained, opening the file. "But they have also opened 3 shell accounts in the Cayman Islands and have begun liquidating the company's domestic assets. They are bleeding the company dry. They plan to stay in Europe while the IRS raids the empty offices here in Chicago. And guess who they have set up to take the fall?" The realization hit me harder than the floor had at graduation. Me. I was the chief financial officer in everything but title. My name was on the tax filings. My digital signature was on the audit reports. "They are setting me up," I breathed. "It gets worse," Grandpa said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a bank transfer authorization. "Look at the date." I took the paper. My hands were shaking. The date was yesterday. The amount was $500,000. The source was the Elijah Vance Grandchild Trust, my trust fund. The money Grandma had left specifically for me, which was supposed to be untouchable until I turned 30 or got married. I looked at the signature line. There, in ink that looked disturbingly like mine, was the name, Maya Vance. "They forged my signature," I said, the anger boiling over into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "They waited until I was in a coma, literally dying in a hospital bed, and they forged my signature to steal my inheritance. They needed the cash to pay off Connor's gambling debts before they left the country," Grandpa said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Connor owes the kind of people who do not send invoices. They send hitmen. Your parents sacrificed your future to save that leech." I stared at the document. That money was my freedom. It was my startup capital. It was the only thing that made the years of abuse bearable, knowing I had an exit strategy, and they had stolen it to buy freedom for a man who laughed at my pain. Mr. Sterling closed the file. "This is a felony, Maya. Fraud, forgery, grand larceny. We have enough here to send them to prison for 20 years. But the courts are slow, and by the time we get a judgment, the money will be gone and they will be disappearing into the European countryside. Grandpa leaned forward. The mechanical hum of his chair was the only sound in the room. He reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a small black USB drive. It looked unassuming, just a simple piece of plastic and metal. But when he placed it in my hand, it felt heavier than lead. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. I shook my head. Years ago, when I first built the company mainframe, I had the engineers install a backdoor, a master key. We called it God mode. It bypasses every firewall, every two-factor authentication, and every biometric lock your father installed. It gives you root access to everything. The bank accounts, the emails, the security cameras, even the GPS trackers in the company vehicles. He covered my hand with his. His skin was paper thin, but his grip was iron. Desmond thinks he owns the company. He thinks he owns you. He thinks because I am in that nursing home I am powerless. But I built this empire, and I will be damned if I let a thief and a fool burn it down. He looked me dead in the eye. You are the actuary, Maya. You calculate risk. You assess damage. Tell me, what is the risk to them if you use this drive? I looked at the USB drive in my palm. If I plugged this into my laptop, I could see everything. I could stop the transfers. I could lock them out of their own accounts. I could turn their dream vacation into a nightmare. Total annihilation, I said softly. Grandpa Elijah smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to witness. Then do it. They called you a tool. They called you a workhorse. Show them that you are the architect of their destruction. Teach them a lesson they will never forget. He patted my hand one last time and spun his chair around. Mr. Sterling nodded to me and followed him out. As the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dark once more, I was no longer the sad, abandoned daughter. I reached for my laptop bag. My chest didn't hurt anymore. The only thing I felt was the electric thrill of a hunter who had just been handed a loaded weapon. I plugged the USB drive into the port. The screen flickered and a black command prompt window appeared with green text. Access granted. Welcome, administrator. I cracked my knuckles. Paris is 6 hours ahead, I whispered to the empty room, which means they are just waking up. Let us see how they enjoy their morning coffee when their credit cards stop working. The laptop screen was the only source of light in the room, casting a blue glow over my hospital sheets. For the last 3 hours, I had not been Maya, the patient recovering from heart failure. I was Maya, the actuary, the chief financial officer, and right now, the executioner. With the USB drive plugged in, the God mode access my grandfather gave me stripped away every password and firewall my father had installed. The numbers on the screen told a story far uglier than I had imagined. I started with Connor. My parents treated him like the son they never had, a brilliant entrepreneur who just needed a lucky break. But the ledger told a different truth. I traced the wire transfers from the company accounts into a series of offshore wallets. Connor had not been investing in startups. He had been gambling on high-risk cryptocurrency futures and losing spectacularly. The bleeding was catastrophic. $2 million gone in 6 months. But it was the next layer that made my stomach turn. I found a series of threatening emails in his backup folder from an encrypted server. They were from loan sharks in Chicago's underworld. They were not asking for their money back nicely. They were threatening to break legs. My parents were not just covering for him. They were terrified. I opened the folder marked Paris itinerary. It was not a vacation. It was an evacuation. They were meeting with a shady liquidation firm in France to sell off the Vance family's European assets. The villa in Nice, the stocks in Airbus, even the vintage car collection stored in Lyon. They planned to wash the money through a French shell company, pay off Connor's debts to keep him alive, and leave the American company, the one my grandfather built from the ground up, to implode under the weight of tax fraud and bankruptcy. And I was the one they had set up to take the fall. My digital signature was already stamped on the fraudulent tax returns they had filed while I was unconscious. Rage is a funny thing. When it gets hot enough, it turns cold. I stopped shaking. My heart rate monitor slowed down to a steady rhythmic beat. I cracked my knuckles and opened the terminal command window. As the lead auditor, I had the authority to trigger a fraud prevention protocol known as the red flag. Usually this requires 3 levels of approval, but with Grandpa's master key, I was all 3 levels. I began typing the code. Target accounts: Desmond Vance, Patricia Vance, Connor Sterling, Ebony Vance, status, frozen, reason, suspicion of international money laundering and identity theft. I hovered my finger over the enter key. This was the nuclear option. Once I did this, there was no going back. The banks would instantly lock everything: credit cards, checking accounts, investment portfolios. They would be stranded in a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I thought about the nurse telling me they blocked my card for $42,000. I thought about the photo of them drinking champagne while I died. I pressed enter. The screen flashed green. Protocol activated. All accounts suspended. Now all I had to do was wait. It did not take long. It was evening in Chicago, which meant it was dinner time in Paris. I pulled up the real-time transaction log on my screen. I saw the attempt come through. Transaction declined. Le Jules Verne Restaurant, Paris. Amount $5,400. Cardholder Desmond Vance. I smiled in the dark. Le Jules Verne was located on the 2nd floor of the Eiffel Tower. It was one of the most expensive and exclusive restaurants in the world. I could imagine the scene perfectly. My father stuffed into his tuxedo trying to look important, the waiter returning with the card whispering discreetly that there was a problem. My father blustering, demanding they run it again. My mother nervously checking her own card, only to find it declined too. The humiliation of being escorted out past the other diners, the embarrassment burning their cheeks. Then the storm hit. My phone, which had been silent for 2 days, suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. It started with a single text from my mother. It just said, "Call us, now." Then came the flood. The phone vibrated so hard it danced across the bedside table. 12 missed calls in 1 minute, then 20, then 48. The screen was a blur of names: Dad, Mom, Ebony. They were panicking. They were realizing that the ATM machine they called a daughter had just unplugged itself. I picked up the phone, but I did not answer. I just watched the messages roll in. Dad texted, "The bank says there is a security hold. Fix it immediately. We cannot pay the bill." "This is embarrassing," Mom texted. "Maya, pick up the phone." "Are you doing this? This is not funny." "We are stranded," Ebony texted. "You jealous witch. You ruined my night. I cannot believe you are this petty." But the text that made me sit up straight came from a number I did not have saved, but I knew exactly who it was. It was Connor, and he was not pretending anymore. The text was short, misspelled, and terrifying. "You think you are smart, don't you? Undo it right now, or I swear to God you will regret it. I know where you live. I know you are alone in that hospital. You have 5 minutes to unlock the money, or I am calling my friends in Chicago to pay you a visit." I looked at the threat. A week ago, it would have terrified me. I would have folded. I would have apologized and fixed it just to keep the peace. But the Maya who woke up in this bed was done keeping the peace. I took a screenshot of the threat and forwarded it directly to the private email of the FBI agent my grandfather's lawyer had put me in touch with. Then I typed my first and only response to the family group chat. "I am not the one who needs to worry about the police. Enjoy Paris. I hear the jails are lovely this time of year." I turned off my phone, laid back against the pillows, and for the first time in 72 hours, I closed my eyes and slept like a baby. The war had officially begun. The flight tracker app on my phone showed their plane touching down at O'Hare International Airport at 6 in the morning. I had watched the little airplane icon cross the Atlantic Ocean all night, counting down the minutes until the inevitable explosion. I knew exactly how long it would take them to clear customs, realize their private driver was not there because I had canceled the service and hail a cab to the hospital. I had precisely 45 minutes to prepare. I sat up in bed, adjusted my hospital gown, and placed my laptop on the tray table in front of me. I was not hiding. I was waiting. At exactly 7:15, the silence of the cardiac ward was shattered. I could hear them before I saw them. My mother's voice, usually pitched to a polite soprano for social events, was shrill and echoing down the corridor. She was demanding to know where her daughter was, but there was no panic in her tone, only fury. The heavy door to my room did not just open. It was thrown wide with enough force to bang against the wall. Patricia Vance stood there, framed by the doorway. She was wearing a beige cashmere travel set that probably cost more than the nurse's annual salary, but she looked unraveled. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity, her eyes were bloodshot, and her designer bag was clutched in her hand like a weapon. Behind her stood my father Desmond. He looked smaller than I remembered, his face glistening with sweat, his tie loosened. They brought the smell of stale airplane air and desperate anger into my sterile sanctuary. For a moment, just a split second, my mother composed herself. She noticed a nurse adjusting my IV drip in the corner. Immediately, the mask slid into place. Patricia rushed forward, her hands clasped to her chest, her face contorting into a performance of maternal anguish. "Oh, my poor baby," she wailed, rushing toward the bed. "We came as soon as we heard. We were so terrified." She reached out to hug me, but I did not flinch. I did not lean into her. I simply stared at her with dead, cold eyes. The nurse looked at them with sympathy, clearly thinking this was a touching family reunion. "I will give you some privacy," the nurse whispered, slipping out of the room and closing the door softly behind her. The latch had barely clicked shut when my mother's posture changed. The weeping stopped instantly. She straightened her spine, her eyes narrowing into slits. She did not ask how my heart was. She did not ask if I was in pain. She lunged for the tray table. "Give me the laptop!" She hissed, her fingernails clicking against the plastic casing as she tried to grab it. "Undo it right now, Maya. Do you have any idea who we had to call to get a ride here?" My credit card was declined for a cup of coffee at the airport. A cup of coffee. I placed my hand firmly on the laptop, pinning it down. "Hello to you too, Mother," I said, my voice raspy but steady. "I am feeling much better, thank you for asking." My father stepped forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "This is not a game, Maya," he roared, his voice shaking the room. "You have triggered a red flag audit on the company accounts. Do you know what happens when the banks see that? They freeze everything. The IRS is automatically notified. You are not just stopping us from spending money, you are inviting the federal government to look at our books. And what will they find, Dad?" I asked, tilting my head. "Will they find the $2 million you siphoned off to pay for Connor's crypto losses? Will they find the shell company in the Cayman Islands? Or will they find the unauthorized withdrawal from my trust fund with a signature that does not belong to me?" Desmond froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You ungrateful little wretch," he spat. "Everything we did for this family, for the legacy. And this is how you repay us. By trying to send your own father to prison for tax evasion. You committed the crime," I said simply. "I am just the auditor who found it." "That is what you paid for my degree for, isn't it? You wanted the best actuary in Chicago. Well, you got her." That was the moment my mother lost control. The humiliation of the declined card, the fear of losing her status, the exhaustion of the flight, it all boiled over. She screamed a raw, guttural sound and raised her hand. She swung at me with all her strength, aiming a slap right at my cheek the same way she used to discipline me when I was a child and forgot to curtsy in church. But I was not a child anymore, and I had spent the last 3 days visualizing this exact moment. I did not block it. I did not have to. I simply leaned back into my pillow and her hand struck the metal railing of the hospital bed with a sickening crack. She cried out, clutching her wrist, staring at me in shock. "You tried to hit a heart attack patient," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "That is assault, Patricia. And you just did it in a room with a camera." I pointed to the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. It was a bluff. There was no camera in the private rooms, only in the hallway. But guilt makes people stupid, and fear makes them blind. My mother looked at the ceiling, her face draining of color. Desmond lunged for the laptop again. "I do not care about the camera," he shouted. "Give me the password. I will smash this thing to pieces if I have to." I moved my hand to the red call button attached to the side of my bed. I did not press it frantically. I pressed it once, holding it down for 3 seconds, signaling a code gray, which in hospital speak means a combative visitor. "I would not do that if I were you," I said. "Get the hell out of my way," Desmond growled, reaching for my neck. The door burst open. This time it was not a polite nurse. 2 massive hospital security guards wearing tactical vests filled the doorway. Behind them stood the head nurse, looking furious. "Step away from the patient," the lead guard barked, his hand resting on his taser. My father froze, his hands inches from my throat. He slowly backed away, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender that looked pathetic on a man who laid claim to being a community leader. "These people are bothering me," I said calmly to the guards. "They are not on my visitor list. They attempted to steal my personal property and assault me. Please remove them." My mother tried to salvage the situation. She turned to the guard, forcing a trembling smile. "Officer, there is a misunderstanding. We are her parents. She is hallucinating from the medication. We just want to help her." I picked up my phone and held it up. I have a recording of the last 5 minutes. I lied smoothly. "Would you like me to play the part where you tried to slap me? Or the part where my father admitted to tax fraud?" The blood drained from my mother's face. She looked at the guards, then at me, realizing she had absolutely no power here. In this room, cash did not rule, medical protocol did, and I was the patient. "Ma'am, let's go," the guard said, taking Patricia by the elbow. He was not gentle. My father looked at me one last time. His eyes were full of hate. "You are dead to us, Maya," he whispered. "You have no family. You have nothing." I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. "I have the laptop, Dad. And I have the USB drive, which means I have everything." I watched as the guards escorted them out. My mother was protesting about her cashmere being wrinkled, and my father was trying to threaten the guards with a lawsuit. As they were dragged down the hallway, other patients and visitors poked their heads out to watch the spectacle. The great Desmond and Patricia Vance, pillars of society, being thrown out like common drunks. The door closed, leaving me in silence once again. My heart monitor was beeping a little faster now, but I felt lighter. I pulled the laptop closer. They thought this was the end. They thought they could bully me into submission. But I was just getting started. I opened a new window on my screen. It was time to contact the FBI. The drive from the hospital to my apartment building was the first time I had breathed fresh air in 4 days. Grandpa Elijah's private security detail, a silent giant of a man named Marcus, dropped me off at the curb. He offered to walk me up, but I refused. I needed to feel normal again. I needed to walk through my own front door, kick off my shoes, and pretend for just 1 hour that my entire life was not currently a crime scene investigation. My apartment complex in downtown Chicago was my sanctuary. It was the one thing I bought entirely with my own money, separate from the family trust, separate from the Vance empire. It was a high-security building with a doorman and keycard access. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. When the elevator doors slid open on the 14th floor, the hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Usually I could hear Mrs. Higgins' television from down the hall or the hum of the ventilation system. Today the silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I walked toward my door, my keys clutched in my hand, my heart still recovering from its trauma, beating a little too fast. I reached for the lock, And that is when the shadow detached itself from the alcove near the emergency exit. "Hello, Maya." I spun around, dropping my keys. Connor was standing there. But this was not the Connor from the Instagram photo, the polished, arrogant entrepreneur sipping champagne in first class. This version of Connor looked like he had been dragged backward through a hurricane. His designer suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and chemical stimulants. He had stubble on his chin, and he smelled faintly of stale bourbon and desperate fear. "How did you get up here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "The doorman calls up for guests." Connor laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I told him I was your brother. The white privilege card still works wonders, Maya. He thinks I am here to check on my sick sister. He even let me up without buzzing." He took a step toward me. I took a step back, my back hitting my apartment door. "Get out of my way, Connor," I said. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but I have plenty to say to you," he sneered, closing the distance until I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You think you are so smart, don't you? The little genius actuary. You think because you can read a spreadsheet you can ruin my life. You ruined your own life when you stole my inheritance," I shot back. He slammed his hand against the wall next to my head, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the narrow hallway. "Do not lie to me. I know what you are doing. You are faking this whole heart condition." I spoke to a doctor friend of mine. He said, "Stress cardiomyopathy is subjective. You staged it. You collapsed on that stage on purpose to get sympathy and to distract everyone while you hacked the accounts." I stared at him incredulous. "You are delusional." My heart stopped, Connor. "I was clinically dead, and I am going to make sure you stay dead professionally," he hissed, leaning in close. "I am going to report you to the Actuarial Board of Standards. I am going to tell them you falsified medical records to evade work responsibilities. I will say you are mentally unstable. I will have your license revoked. You will never audit another book in this city again. You will be working at a drive-through window when I am done with you." It was a classic intimidation tactic. Attack the victim's credibility, threaten their livelihood. But Connor made a mistake. He assumed I cared about my job more than the truth. He assumed I was still the passive girl who just wanted everyone to get along. "Is that all?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Because if you are done threatening my career, I would like to go inside and feed my cat." Connor's face twitched. The mention of my cat seemed to trigger something dark behind his eyes. The mask of the aggrieved businessman slipped, completely revealing the cornered animal underneath. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bruise from the IV line. "Listen to me, you little witch," he snarled, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "This isn't about your job anymore. This is about survival. I owe people money. Bad people. People who don't care about lawsuits or audits." $2 million, I said calmly. "That is the number, isn't it? That is how much you lost on crypto futures." His grip tightened. Pain shot up my shoulder, but I didn't flinch. I needed him to keep talking. "I need that money released, Maya," he said, shaking me slightly. "I have 48 hours. If I don't pay them, they are going to come for me, and if they come for me, I am going to point them in your direction." He leaned his forehead against mine, invading my personal space in the most violating way possible. "I know you live alone. I know you have that little cat, Luna, isn't it? It would be a shame if something happened to her, or if your apartment suddenly caught fire while you were sleeping. Accidents happen all the time in the city." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He was threatening my life. He was threatening an innocent animal. He was admitting to being in bed with organized crime. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a confession. "So let me get this straight," I said, staring into his bloodshot eyes. "You are admitting that you forged my signature to steal $500,000, and now you are extorting me to release another $2 million of company funds to pay off illegal gambling debts, or else you will physically harm me and my pet. Is that correct?" Connor sneered, pulling back slightly but keeping his hand on my arm. You can use all the fancy legal words you want. The bottom line is, you unlock that account tonight or you won't wake up tomorrow. Do we have an understanding? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. I let a small, cold smile play on my lips. It was the smile of someone who had already won the chess match 5 moves ago. We have an understanding, Connor, I said. He let go of my arm, looking satisfied. Good. I knew you were smart. Do it tonight. He turned to walk away, adjusting his rumpled suit jacket, thinking he had successfully terrified me into submission. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. Connor, I called out. He stopped and looked back over his shoulder. What? I raised my left wrist. I was wearing my black smartwatch. The screen was glowing red with a recording interface. Thank you for the confession, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the hallway. This device has been recording since you stepped out of the alcove, and thanks to the cloud sync feature, the audio file has already been uploaded to 3 different secure servers and emailed to my grandfather's attorney. Connor's face went pale. The arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer panic. He lunged toward me. Give me that watch! But the elevator doors opened behind him. A young couple walked out, laughing, holding grocery bags. They stopped when they saw Connor lunging at a woman in the hallway. Is everything okay here? The man asked, stepping between us. Connor froze. He looked at the couple, then at me, then at the recording light on my wrist. He knew he couldn't assault me with witnesses. You will regret this, Maya, he whispered, backing into the elevator. You have no idea what you have just started. I watched the doors slide shut, cutting off his desperate, angry face. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My legs felt weak. I turned and fumbled with my lock, finally getting the door open. I rushed inside, locked the deadbolt, engaged the security chain, and leaned my back against the door. Luna. My black cat trotted into the hallway, meowing a greeting. I scooped her up, burying my face in her fur, shaking uncontrollably. But amidst the fear, I felt a surge of power. I had him. I had the threats. I had the admission of debt. I had the motive. I walked over to my laptop, sat down on the floor, and opened the audio file. The waveform appeared on the screen. I pressed play. Connor's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. I owe people money. Bad people. I saved the file as insurance policy. Then I opened a new email draft. Subject: urgent evidence regarding Connor Sterling. Recipient: FBI Financial Crimes Division. I attached the file. I hit send. You wanted a war. Connor, I whispered to the empty room, you just handed me the nuclear codes. The evening rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, creating a barrier between me and the city lights below. I was sitting on my sofa with Luna curled in my lap, trying to stop my hands from trembling after the encounter with Connor. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. I looked at the digital clock. It was 8 in the evening. My stomach growled, reminding me I had not eaten a real meal since the hospital cafeteria breakfast. The buzzer to my apartment rang, making me jump. Luna hissed and bolted under the couch. I checked the video intercom, expecting the police or maybe Connor coming back with reinforcements. But the grainy black and white screen showed a figure standing alone in the lobby, huddled inside a trench coat, holding a plastic bag. It was my mother. She looked small. The imperious, screaming woman from the hospital room was gone. In her place was the woman I remembered from my childhood, the one who used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings before church. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, her face devoid of makeup. I buzzed her in. I told myself it was for closure, but deep down, a small, foolish part of me still wanted a mother. When I opened the door, the smell hit me instantly. Rosemary, thyme, and roasted chicken. She was holding a large Tupperware container, the steam fogging up the lid. I made your favorite, she said softly, her voice trembling. Creole-style chicken soup. I know the hospital food is terrible, She did not wait for an invitation. She walked past me into the kitchen, setting the container on the island. She started moving around my kitchen with a familiarity that made my chest ache. She found the bowls. She found the spoons. She ladled out a steaming portion and pushed it toward me. "Eat," she commanded gently. "You look too thin, Maya." I sat down on the bar stool. The soup smelled like home. It smelled like the days before Connor, before the trust fund, before the resentment. I took a spoonful. It was perfect. Warm, spicy, comforting. "I am sorry about earlier," Patricia said, not looking at me. She was wiping a non-existent spot on the counter. "The flight was a nightmare. Your father was yelling. I was exhausted. I should not have raised my hand to you." It was the first apology I had heard from her in a decade. I wanted to accept it. I wanted to wrap myself in it like a blanket. "Why are you here, Mom?" I asked quietly. She sighed and sat down on the stool next to me. She reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was soft. "Your father is in bad shape, Maya. His blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says he is a stroke risk. He built that company from the ground up after your grandfather retired. It is his life. If the bank sees it, it will kill him." She squeezed my hand, her eyes filling with tears. "And Connor, I know you hate him. I know he is reckless. But he is family. He made a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. But he is young. He is 30 years old, Mom," I said. "He stole $2 million. That is not a mistake. That is a crime." "It is a mess," she agreed, nodding fervently. "But we fix messes inside the house, Maya. That is what we do. You know how hard it is for people like us in this city. They are waiting for us to fail. The banks, the media, the people at the country club who smile to our faces but whisper when we turn around. If this goes public, if Connor goes to jail, it destroys all of us. The Vance legacy will be a joke." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We have to protect each other. Black women have to hold the family together because the world tries to tear our men apart. You know that. You are the strong one, Maya. You always have been." I looked at her pleading face. She was using everything she had. My heritage, my loyalty, my strength. She was painting me as the matriarch in training, the savior of the family honor. For a second, the ice around my heart began to melt. Maybe she was right. Maybe turning them in was too harsh. Maybe I could work out a payment plan for Connor. Maybe we could handle this quietly. "Mom," I started, my voice wavering. She saw the hesitation. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. It was the release form for the bank. "Just sign this, baby," she said, pushing a pen into my hand. "Just unlock the account so we can pay off those dangerous men Connor owes. Then we will deal with him, I promise. I will make it up to you. We will go on a trip, just us girls. Spa weekend. Anything you want." I looked at the pen. I looked at the soup. I looked at my mother's hopeful, desperate eyes. And then a flash of memory hit me. I saw the Instagram photo again. I saw the champagne flute in her hand. I saw the caption, "No drama, finally free." She wasn't here because she missed me. She wasn't here because she cared about my health. She was here because Connor had failed to bully me, so she was sent in as the second wave. The good cop. The manipulator. I put the spoon down. The soup suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. "Mom," I asked, keeping my voice very low, "do you know what happened to me on that stage?" She blinked, confused by the sudden change of subject. "You fainted, Maya." "We know. It was heat exhaustion." My heart stopped, I said, staring directly into her eyes. It stopped beating for 10 seconds. "I was dead, Mom. The doctors had to use electricity to bring me back. My ribs are still bruised from the chest compressions." I watched her face closely. I was looking for horror. I was looking for shock. I was looking for a mother realizing she almost lost her child. But I didn't see any of that. I saw impatience. I saw a flicker of annoyance that I was steering the conversation away from the signature. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, stop it, Maya. You are fine now. You are sitting here eating soup. Don't be so dramatic. You always hold on to things to make people feel guilty." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the answer to every question I had ever asked myself about their love. It wasn't that she didn't understand. It was that she didn't care. My death was an inconvenience. My survival was only useful if it could unlock a bank account. I stood up. I picked up the document and the pen. "Sign it, Maya," she urged, mistaking my movement for compliance. "Do it for the family." I took the paper and ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti raining down onto the kitchen counter. "Maya," she gasped, standing up. "What are you doing?" I walked to the door and opened it. The cold wind from the hallway rushed in. "Get out," I said. She stared at me, her mouth agape. "You can't be serious. Your father—" "My father can rot," I said, my voice trembling, not with sadness but with pure unadulterated rage. "And you can take your soup with you." She grabbed her purse, her face twisting back into the ugly sneer I had seen at the hospital. "You are making a huge mistake. You will be alone, Maya. No one will want you. You are a bitter, selfish girl." I slammed the door in her face. I threw the deadbolt. Then I slid down to the floor and pulled my knees to my chest. I didn't cry. I was done crying for them. I felt Luna rub her soft head against my hand. "I am not alone," I whispered to the empty room. "And for the first time in my life, I am free." I picked up my phone. I had one more call to make. The FBI agent had asked for a witness statement. It was time to give them everything. The morning sun that filtered through my apartment blinds felt like a lie. It promised a new day, a fresh start, but the envelope sitting on my kitchen counter promised nothing but war. It had arrived via a bike courier at 7 in the morning, marked urgent and confidential. The return address was from the law firm of Hightower and Associates, the most aggressive, expensive corporate litigators in Chicago. They were my father's sharks, the ones he kept on retainer to bully small competitors and intimidate former employees. Now they were swimming in my waters. I sat on the bar stool, a mug of cold coffee untouched in front of me, and slit the envelope open with a steak knife. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents bound with a heavy metal clip. The cover letter was brief and terrifyingly polite. It stated that due to my recent and public medical episode, coupled with a history of erratic behavior, my parents were exercising their rights under a durable power of attorney to assume full control of my financial assets and, more importantly, the voting rights for the Vance family trust. I frowned. A power of attorney. I had never signed a power of attorney. I was 29 years old, of sound mind, and meticulously careful with legal documents. I flipped past the cover letter to the exhibit marked A, and there it was. A document dated June 15th. It was a standard general durable power of attorney form, granting Desmond and Patricia Vance the authority to act on my behalf in all business and medical matters. At the bottom of the page, above the notary stamp of a woman I had never met, was my signature. I stared at it. It was a good forgery. In fact, it was excellent. The loop of the M was perfectly arched. The sharp slant of the V was identical to how I signed my checks. If I were a stranger, I would believe it was mine. Connor had clearly spent hours practicing this, probably tracing it from the birthday cards I used to send them. But there was one problem, one glaring, impossible error that turned this piece of paper from a legal weapon into a smoking gun. The date. June 15th. June 15th was the day of my graduation. June 15th was the day I collapsed on stage at 2 in the afternoon. June 15th was the day my heart stopped. According to the timestamp on this document, I supposedly signed it at 4:30 in the afternoon. At 4:30 on June 15th, I was in a medically induced coma in the intensive care unit, intubated with my hands restrained to the bed rails to prevent me from pulling out the tubes. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. They were not just lying to me. They were lying to the federal government. They were presenting a forged document to seize control of a multi-million-dollar company so they could liquidate it before the FBI froze their assets. I reached for my phone to call my grandfather's lawyer, but before I could dial, a notification popped up from a local news app. Breaking news, Vance family tragedy. My stomach dropped. I tapped the link. A video started playing. It was a press conference held on the steps of my father's church. Desmond and Patricia were standing there, flanked by their lawyer and the pastor. My mother was wearing black, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. My father looked solemn, the weight of the world on his shoulders. "We are asking for privacy at this difficult time," my father said into the microphone, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Our daughter Maya has suffered a severe mental breakdown brought on by the immense pressure of her studies and underlying psychological issues. Her erratic behavior, her paranoia, and her recent attempts to sabotage the family business are all symptoms of her condition." The camera zoomed in on my mother. "We love her so much," Patricia sobbed. "We are doing everything we can to get her the help she needs. We have had to take legal steps to assume conservatorship to protect her from herself. She is not in her right mind. She is a danger to her own future." I watched in horror as the reporter cut back to the studio. Sources close to the family say that Maya Vance has been hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation after threatening family members and making wild accusations of fraud. I threw the phone across the room. It bounced off the sofa cushions and landed on the rug. They were gaslighting the entire city of Chicago. They were painting me as the crazy, ungrateful daughter who had snapped under pressure. They were using the very medical emergency they had ignored to discredit me. If I went to the police now, if I went to the bank, my parents would simply wave this press conference and the forged power of attorney in their faces. They would say, "Look, poor Maya is having an episode. Don't listen to her. She is delusional." I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I half expected to see men in white coats coming to drag me away. My phone buzzed again. And again. Texts from former classmates. Messages from colleagues at the audit firm. "Maya, I saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need help? I heard you had a breakdown. I hope you get better soon." Even my friends were buying it. The narrative was too clean, too perfect. The respectable, wealthy Vance family trying to save their troubled daughter. Who would believe that the parents crying on television were actually international money launderers who left that same daughter to die on a floor? I felt a wave of nausea. I was trapped. If I fought them publicly, I looked like I was spiraling. If I stayed silent, they took the company, sold it, and left me with nothing but a ruined reputation and a psychiatric file. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. Luna, my cat, walked over and nudged my hand. I looked at her, and then I looked back at the forged document on the counter. June 15th. They got the date wrong. A slow realization began to dawn on me. They were arrogant. They were sloppy. They assumed that because I was unconscious, there would be no record of my inability to sign. They forgot that hospitals keep records of everything. Every dose of medicine, every vital sign, every minute I was sedated. They had handed me the murder weapon with their fingerprints all over it. I stood up. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They wanted to play the legal game. They wanted to drag this into the court of public opinion. Fine. I would not just beat them. I would let them think they had won. I would let them walk into the trap with their eyes wide open. I walked over to where my phone had landed and picked it up. I dialed a number I had memorized. It rang once, twice. "Hello, Maya." Grandpa Elijah's voice was calm, steady as a rock. "Did you see the news?" I asked. "I did," he replied. "A masterful performance. Patricia should have been an actress." "They forged a power of attorney, Grandpa," I said, staring at the document. "They dated it June 15th, the day I was in the coma." There was a pause on the line, and then a low, dry chuckle. "June 15th, he repeated. "They really are desperate, aren't they? They just handed us an open and shut case of perjury and fraud. But we cannot just show this to a judge, Maya. A judge takes months. By then they will have sold the assets and fled to France. I know I said, we need to end this now, tonight. What is the plan, my grandfather asked. I took a deep breath. I am going to surrender. Excuse me, I am going to call them. I am going to tell them that I saw the press conference, that I am broken, that I am confused and scared and I just want my family back. I am going to tell them that I am ready to sign over the access codes to the main server, but I need to do it in person. I want to apologize to the board of directors for my behavior. You want to lure them into a board meeting, Grandpa said, catching on instantly. Exactly, I said. They think I am mentally unstable. They think I am weak. Let them believe it. I will summon an emergency meeting of the board for tomorrow morning. I will tell them I am coming in to resign and hand over the keys to the kingdom. And when they are all sitting there gloating thinking they have won, Grandpa said, his voice rising with excitement, I will show them the truth I finished, not just the forgery, the video of Connor, the bank transfers, the hospital logs, everything. And I want the FBI waiting in the lobby. It is risky, Maya, Grandpa warned. If they sense a trap, they will run. You have to be convincing. You have to make them believe they have broken you. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale. I looked like a woman who had lost everything. I don't have to act, Grandpa, I whispered. They did break me. They broke the part of me that loved them. And now they are going to deal with what is left. Call Mr. Sterling, Grandpa said. Get the agents ready. I will polish my shoes. I haven't been to a board meeting in 5 years. I wouldn't miss this for the world. I hung up the phone. I looked at the forged signature one last time. Goodbye, Maya Vance, the dutiful daughter, I said to the empty room. I picked up the phone again and dialed my father's number. I let my voice tremble. I let the tears I had been holding back flood my throat. I prepared to give the performance of a lifetime. Dad, I choked out when he answered. Please, stop. I give up. You win. The suit I chose for the morning of the board meeting was charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass and tailored to perfection. My mother always said that you should dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Today I was dressing for the job of executioner. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, smoothing down the lapels, staring at the woman staring back at me. She looked tired. Her eyes were shadowed, her skin a little pale from the days of stress and the recovery from cardiac arrest. But she did not look broken. That was the trick. I had to walk into that boardroom, looking just defeated enough to lower their guard, but strong enough to survive what was about to happen. I picked up my leather portfolio. Inside there were no resignation letters. There were no transfer of power documents. Instead, there were 20 copies of a forensic audit report meticulously compiled over the last 48 hours. There were screenshots of text messages. There were transcripts of recordings. And most damning of all, there was the hospital log, proving that I was unconscious at the exact moment my father claimed I signed away my rights. I took a deep breath, checked my phone one last time, and saw the notification I had been expecting. Ebony was live on Instagram. I tapped the screen. The video showed the interior of a luxury SUV. Ebony was sitting in the back seat, wearing oversized sunglasses and a bright yellow power suit that screamed attention. She was holding a latte in one hand and her phone in the other. Hey guys, she chirped, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Big day for the Vance family today. We are heading to the tower to finally settle some internal business. You know, sometimes family members just can't handle the pressure of the empire, and the strong ones have to step up to protect the legacy. It is sad, really, but we are doing what is best for my sister. Family is everything, right? Drop a heart in the chat if you agree that loyalty is royalty. I watched the hearts float up the screen. I watched the comments pouring in, praising her, calling her a boss babe, sending prayers for her troubled sister. She was monetizing my destruction in real time. She was spinning the narrative before we even entered the building, ensuring that whatever happened today, she would look like the benevolent savior. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. I turned off the phone, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. The drive to the Vance Tower was a blur. When I pulled into the underground garage, the security guard, Mr. Henderson, tipped his hat to me. He had worked here since my grandfather's days. He looked at me with concern. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," he said quietly. "I saw the news. I just want you to know some of us here. We know who really runs this place. We are rooting for you." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, managing a small, genuine smile. "Do me a favor. In about 20 minutes, some gentlemen from the federal government are going to arrive. Please send them directly to the penthouse boardroom. Do not call up to announce them. Just let them through." He looked at me, his eyes widening slightly. Then he gave a sharp nod. "Understood, ma'am." I took the private elevator up to the 40th floor. The silence in the metal box was heavy. My heart monitor, hidden under my blouse, gave a reassuringly steady rhythm. I was ready. When the doors opened, the reception area was quiet. The secretaries were typing away, but the atmosphere was tense. They had all seen the news. They all thought I was coming in to resign. I walked past them, head held high, ignoring the whispers. I entered the boardroom. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The massive mahogany table, which could seat 30 people, gleamed under the recessed lighting. At the head of the table sat my grandfather's empty chair. No one had sat in it since he retired. My father always sat to the right of it. I walked over to the side table and set up my laptop. I connected it to the main projector but kept the screen blank. Then I sat down in the chair directly opposite my father's designated seat. 10 minutes later, the double doors swung open. They walked in like they were the royal family entering court. My father led the way, looking solemn but undeniably triumphant. He was wearing his best navy suit, a flag pin on his lapel. My mother was right behind him, clutching a designer handbag, her face set in a mask of tragic resolve. Ebony followed, still holding her phone, though she had stopped recording. And bringing up the rear was Connor. He looked better than he had in the hallway. He had shaved, put on a clean suit, and slicked back his hair. But his eyes were darting around the room, nervous energy radiating off him. Behind them came the company's general counsel, a man named Robert, who had been my father's golf buddy for 20 years, and 3 other board members who were staunch allies of my parents. They stopped when they saw me sitting there. "Maya," my father said, his voice booming in the acoustic space. "I am glad you made it. I was worried you might have another episode." I stood up slowly. "Hello, Dad. Mom. I am fine. Thank you for worrying." My mother walked over, looking like she wanted to hug me for the cameras that weren't there. "Oh, honey, you look exhausted. Are you sure you are up for this? We could have just had the lawyers handle the paperwork. You didn't have to come in." "I wanted to do this in person," I said, keeping my hands clasped in front of me to hide a slight tremor. "I think the board deserves to hear the truth from my own mouth." Robert the lawyer cleared his throat and placed a stack of documents on the table. "Well, that is very brave of you, Maya. We have the papers drawn up right here. It is a standard transfer of voting rights and a voluntary commitment to a wellness facility in Arizona. It is a beautiful place, very relaxing. Just sign here and your parents will take over the day-to-day operations immediately. A wellness facility. They weren't just taking the company. They were planning to ship me off to a glorified asylum to keep me quiet while they looted the accounts." I looked at the papers. I looked at my family. They were all watching me with predatory anticipation. They thought I was broken. They thought I was scared. I picked up the pen. Connor walked around the table to stand behind me, pretending to look for a chair. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of breath mints and stale tobacco. He brought his face right down to my ear, so close that no one else could hear him. "You are doing the right thing, Maya," he whispered, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Good girl. Just sign the paper, and I promise I won't hurt the cat. Be smart. You were never built for this league anyway." He pulled back and gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder. I looked up at him. I looked at the smug smile on his face. And in that moment, the last shred of hesitation evaporated. "You are right, Connor," I said loudly, my voice ringing through the silent room. Everyone turned to look at me. I was never built for this league. I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the mahogany table. Because I don't play in leagues where you have to steal from your own children to pay your gambling debts. I continued, my voice rising. The smile dropped from Connor's face. My father frowned. Maya, what are you talking about? He warned. Sit down and sign the paper. You are having an episode. I am not having an episode, Dad, I said, reaching into my portfolio. I am having a realization. I pulled out the thick stack of forensic audits and threw them into the center of the table. They landed with a heavy thud that made everyone jump. I am not resigning, I announced, looking at the board members, and I am not signing over my voting rights. I called this meeting to invoke Article 15 of the company bylaws, the immediate removal of officers due to criminal misconduct. My mother gasped. Robert? The lawyer stood up. Now see here, Maya. This is preposterous. Is it? I asked. I pressed a key on my laptop. The projector screen behind me roared to life. A massive image appeared on the wall. It was the power of attorney document they had filed. Exhibit A, I said, pointing to the screen. A legal document granting Desmond Vance control of my assets, signed by me on June 15th. I pressed another key. A new image appeared. My hospital chart showing my vitals flatlining, and then the notation patient sedated and intubated. Time 2:00 p.m. to June 17th. Unless I learned how to sign legal documents while in a coma, this signature is a forgery, I stated, and that makes this document a felony. The room went deathly silent. My father's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. Connor looked like he was about to vomit. But that is just the beginning, I said, pacing the room now fueled by the adrenaline of justice. Let's talk about the $2 million missing from the operating account, or the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, or the video I have of my brother-in-law threatening to burn down my apartment. I looked at Connor. He was backing away toward the door. Where are you going, Connor? I asked. The meeting has just started. He didn't answer. He turned and grabbed the door handle, but the door didn't open. It swung inward, pushed by a force from the outside. Standing in the doorway was not the secretary. It was not the coffee guy. It was my grandfather, Elijah Vance, sitting in his wheelchair, looking like an vengeful god. And flanking him were 4 agents in windbreakers with 3 letters printed in bold yellow on the back. FBI. I think you should sit down, son. Grandpa said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. We have a lot to discuss. The view from the 40th floor of the Vance Tower was usually breathtaking. A sprawling panorama of the Chicago skyline bleeding into the endless blue of Lake Michigan. But today the heavy velvet curtains were drawn halfway shut, casting long, dramatic shadows across the mahogany table. The air in the room was recycled and stale thick with the scent of expensive cologne and nervous sweat. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded on top of the leather portfolio that contained the end of my father's career. The board of directors. A collection of 12 men and women who had watched me grow up sat in silence. They were waiting for the show to begin. My father, Desmond, stood at the head of the table. Despite the sudden arrival of my grandfather and the federal agents waiting just outside the double doors, he had decided to play the only card he had left. Denial. He was banking on his charisma, on the decades of influence he had built, to bulldoze through this meeting before anyone could arrest him. He straightened his tie, flashed his signature benevolent smile, and began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, he began, his voice booming with a practiced confidence that almost made me admire his delusion. We are gathering here today at a difficult crossroads. As you know, my daughter Maya has been struggling with significant mental health challenges. It breaks my heart to see her in this state, but as a family, we must prioritize the stability of this company. The markets are volatile. Our investors are nervous. We need strong, decisive leadership, not the erratic confusion of a young woman who has clearly lost her way. He paused for effect, looking around the room, making eye contact with each member. He was good. He was selling them the story of the grieving father, stepping up to save the family legacy. We are pivoting, he continued, gesturing vaguely toward the window. We are looking at new horizons in international markets. Europe, Asia. We have opportunities that require liquid capital and bold decision-making. That is why my wife and I, with heavy hearts, have agreed to assume full executorship of the Vance Trust and the controlling interest in this corporation. Not for us, but for Maya. To protect her inheritance until she is, well again. I watched him lie. I watched the way his mouth moved, the way he used his hands to emphasize words like protection and stability while he was actively planning to loot the accounts and flee to France. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Sitting next to him was Robert, the company's general counsel. He looked less confident than my father. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He pushed a thick stack of documents across the polished wood toward me. Maya, Robert said, his voice tight. These are the transfer papers. They confirm your voluntary resignation as CFO and verify the power of attorney your parents have filed. It is just a formality, really, a way to put this ugly chapter behind us and get you the medical care you need. He uncapped a heavy Mont Blanc pen and set it down on top of the papers. The sound of the pen hitting the table echoed in the silent room. I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Connor. My brother-in-law was sitting directly across from me. He wasn't looking at the board members. He was staring at me. His leg was bouncing up and down under the table, a nervous tick that vibrated the water glass in front of him. But his face was twisted into a smirk of pure, arrogant triumph. He winked at me. It was a small, quick gesture, but it screamed everything he was thinking. We won. You lost. Sign the paper, little girl. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, looking like a man who had already spent the money he was about to steal. He mouthed the words, "Bye-bye." I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I got right before I hit send on a complex audit report. The numbers were balanced. The evidence was compiled. The trap was sprung. I reached out and picked up the pen. My mother let out a visible breath of relief. My father nodded, a look of faux sympathy plastered on his face. Robert the lawyer opened the signature page, pointing to the line marked Declarant. I held the pen over the paper. The nib hovered inches from the line. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the projector fan overhead. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor blade. I set the pen down. I did not sign. My father's smile faltered. Maya, don't make a scene. He warned, his tone hardening. I am not making a scene, Dad, I said, standing up slowly. I just think that before we sign away the future of this company, we should take a moment to celebrate the past. You mentioned international markets. You mentioned bold decisions. I walked over to my laptop, which was connected to the room's main audiovisual system. I have prepared a short video, I announced, looking directly at the board members. It is a tribute to the family's recent trip to Paris. I think it really highlights the kind of leadership my parents and Connor intend to bring to this company. What are you doing? Connor snapped, sitting up straight. His smirk vanished. Just a few memories, Connor, I said, my finger hovering over the space bar. I think the board deserves to see exactly how hard you were working to secure our future. Maya, stop this immediately, my mother hissed, standing up. But it was too late. I pressed the button. The lights in the boardroom dimmed automatically. The massive screen behind my father descended. I hope you all like champagne, I said into the darkness. Because this video cost me $2 million. The giant screen behind me flickered to life, bathing the dim boardroom in a harsh, cold light. My father had expected a montage of the Eiffel Tower, or perhaps a slideshow of family dinners intended to soften the hearts of the board members. He expected a tribute to the lie he had been selling. But the image that appeared was grainy, high-definition black and white security footage, time-stamped June 15th, 4:30 in the afternoon. The location tag in the corner read, Hotel Plaza Athénée Paris, Presidential Suite. The room was so quiet that the hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine. On the screen, the lavish interior of the hotel suite was visible. There was my sister Ebony lounging on a velvet sofa, still wearing her sunglasses indoors, scrolling through her phone. And sitting at the ornate writing desk was Connor. He was not looking at sightseeing brochures. He was hunched over a stack of papers, a pen in his hand surrounded by crumpled sheets of hotel stationery. I stepped to the side so everyone could see clearly. This was taken 3 hours after you received the call that I had collapsed. I said, my voice calm and steady. On the screen, Connor held up a piece of paper. He squinted at it, then looked at his phone, then back at the paper. He was tracing something. The audio from the video, crisp and clear, thanks to the expensive surveillance package my grandfather had authorized, filled the boardroom. "It is too loopy," Connor's recorded voice said. He sounded frustrated. "Maya makes her Ms. Sharp at the top, like mountains." Ebony laughed on the recording. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "Who cares, Connor? Just get it close enough. The bank is not going to check. They are just happy to get the transfer fees. Besides, she is in a coma. She is not going to wake up and object." The air in the boardroom seemed to vanish. I saw Mrs. Sterling, the board member who had known me since I was a baby, bring her hand to her mouth in horror. My mother let out a small strangled gasp, but she did not look at the screen. She looked at the floor. On the video, Connor smirked. "You are right. She is probably drooling on a pillow right now." "Okay, I think I got it. This looks official." He signed the document with a flourish, then held it up to the light. It was the power of attorney form, the same form that Robert, the general counsel, had just tried to use to force my resignation. "That looks perfect," Ebony said on the screen. "Now do the transfer authorization. We need the cash before the markets open in New York." I paused the video. The image of Connor holding the forged document froze on the giant screen looming over the real Connor sitting at the table. The contrast was devastating. The arrogant criminal on the screen versus the terrified man in the room who was currently gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. But I was not done. I pressed the next key on my laptop. The screen split in two. On the left side remained the frozen image of the forgery in Paris. On the right side, a new image appeared. It was a digital scan of my hospital chart from the University of Chicago Medical Center. The timestamp was identical. June 15th, 4:30 in the afternoon. I walked over to the screen and pointed to the medical data. At the exact moment my brother-in-law was practicing my signature in a 5-star hotel in France, this was my status in Chicago. I read the medical notes aloud, my voice ringing with authority. "Patient is unresponsive. Glasgow Coma Scale 3, intubated and ventilated. Hands restrained to bedside to prevent accidental extubation." I turned back to the board of directors. "Unless I have developed the ability to telepathically sign legal documents across an ocean while clinically comatose and physically restrained, the document you are holding is a forgery. And not just a forgery, it is wire fraud, it is identity theft. And since it involves international banking transfers, it is a federal crime under the RICO Act." Robert the lawyer dropped the pen he was holding. It clattered loudly on the table. He looked at the document in front of him as if it were radioactive. He pushed his chair back, distancing himself from my parents. "I did not know," he stammered, looking at the other board members. "I was told she signed it before the incident. I was told it was legitimate." My father stood up, his face a mask of desperate fury. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She manipulated the video. These are deep fakes. You know technology these days. She is trying to frame us because she is mentally unstable." I looked at my father. For years his voice had been the law in my life. When he shouted, I shrank. When he commanded, I obeyed. But today, looking at him sweating and lying in his expensive suit, I realized he was not a giant. He was just a small, greedy man who had underestimated his own daughter. "It is not a deep fake, Dad," I said softly. "And you know it, because you were in the room." I unpaused the video. The camera angle widened. Walking into the frame from the bathroom was my father, Desmond Vance. He was wearing a plush hotel robe. He walked over to Connor, looked at the forged signature, and patted him on the back. "Good work, son," the video Desmond said. "That looks exactly like hers. Get it sent to the lawyer. We need control of the board by Monday." The real Desmond collapsed back into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. The lie was dead. There was no spinning this. There was no explaining it away. He had been caught on camera praising the felony. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The board members were exchanging glances. I could see the shock turning into anger. These were serious business people. They had reputations to protect, and they had just realized that the chairman of the board had tried to make them accomplices to a massive fraud. Then a sound broke the silence. A low scraping sound. It was Connor. He was pushing his chair back. His face had gone from red to a ghostly, sickly white. He looked at the screen, then at the door, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The threats were gone. All that was left was the primal fear of a rat realizing the trap has snapped shut. He stood up, his legs shaking. "I have to go," he mumbled. "I think I am going to be sick." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," a deep voice commanded from the back of the room. Everyone turned. My grandfather Elijah rolled his wheelchair forward a few inches. He did not shout, but his voice carried the weight of a man who had built this tower with his bare hands. "Nobody is leaving this room," Grandpa said. "Not until the guests outside have had a chance to say hello." Connor froze. He looked at the double doors. He looked at the FBI agents standing behind the glass. He realized that the text message I had sent him, the one he thought was a bluff, was the truest thing I had ever written. I wasn't the one who needed to worry about the police. I looked at Connor and allowed myself a moment of pure, cold satisfaction. "You said I wasn't built for this league." "Connor," I said, closing my laptop, "you were right. I don't play in your league. I own the stadium." The color drained from his face completely. He looked at Ebony for help, but she was staring at her phone, frantically trying to delete her live stream, realizing too late that she had broadcasted her location to the entire world. The trap was perfect, the evidence was irrefutable, and the payoff was just beginning. I turned to the federal agents waiting by the door and gave a small nod. It was time to clean house. The FBI agents remained by the door, silent sentinels, watching the slow-motion car crash of the Vance empire. My grandfather did not move from his wheelchair, but his presence filled the room like a thundercloud. The air conditioning hummed, but the temperature in the room felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. I turned back to the screen. The video of the forgery was damning, but it was just the method. Now I had to show them the motive. I had to show them exactly how cheap their integrity really was. I pressed the forward key on my laptop. The video of the hotel room vanished, replaced by a complex color-coded flowchart. It looked like a spider web with lines stretching from the company's main operating accounts in Chicago to a series of opaque destinations around the globe. "This is the forensic audit of the last 6 months," I announced, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "I want you to look closely at the red lines. Those represent unauthorized wire transfers labeled as consulting fees and international vendor payments." I walked over to the screen and traced a line from the Vance Enterprises primary holding account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Ventures. On paper, Blue Horizon is a logistics firm, I explained. My father told the board that this company was handling our expansion into European markets. He claimed they were securing warehouses and shipping routes. But when I cracked the encryption on the transfer logs, I found that Blue Horizon has no employees. It has no warehouses. It has no trucks. It is just a mailbox in Georgetown. I clicked the remote. The screen zoomed in on the outflow from Blue Horizon. "And here is where the money goes," I said. "Within 24 hours of arriving in the Caymans, 90% of the funds are wired back to the United States. But not to Vance Enterprises. They are wired to 3 specific accounts. One is a private holding company owned by Desmond and Patricia Vance. The second is a cryptocurrency exchange wallet registered to an anonymous user. I looked at Connor. And the third is a direct payment to a known loan shark organization operating out of the south side of Chicago. The board members gasped. Mrs. Sterling, the matriarch of the board who always wore pearls and sat with perfect posture, put a hand to her throat. "Loan sharks," she whispered, looking at my father with horror. "Desmond, tell me this is not true." My father tried to speak, but his voice was a dry croak. He cleared his throat, desperate to regain his footing. "It is a misunderstanding," he stammered, sweating profusely now. We were dealing with unconventional lenders to bridge a liquidity gap. It was a business strategy. It was not a strategy, Dad," I cut him off, my voice sharp. "It was a bailout." I pulled up the next slide. It showed the crypto wallet. I matched the IP address of the wallet owner to the GPS data from Connor's phone. The anonymous trader is Connor Sterling, and the trading history shows a net loss of $2.1 million in 6 months. I turned to the board. My parents did not steal this money to expand the company. They stole it to cover the gambling debts of a man who played with family money like it was Monopoly cash. They drained the operating capital, endangered payroll for 300 employees, and committed federal wire fraud, all to keep Connor out of trouble with the mob. Connor had his head in his hands. He was rocking back and forth slightly. But I wasn't done. I had saved the sharpest knife for last. The numbers on the screen showed a massive deficit. Even with the money they stole from the company, the hole in Connor's debt was too deep. They needed more cash to settle the final score before fleeing to France. "But here is the thing about math," I said, looking directly at my mother. "It has to balance. When I ran the numbers last night, there was still a $400,000 discrepancy. You stole from the company, you stole from my trust fund, but you were still short. So I went looking for the missing piece. I looked everywhere. And then I found it." I clicked the final slide. The screen turned white, displaying a single scanned check. The logo in the top left corner did not belong to Vance Enterprises. It featured a cross and a dove. It was the logo of St. Paul's AME Church, the church where my father was the head deacon, the church where my mother led the choir, the church that was the beating heart of the Black elite community in Chicago. The check was made out to cash. It was signed by Desmond Vance, treasurer. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. "You emptied the community outreach fund," I said, my voice trembling slightly with the sheer weight of the disgust I felt. "That money was for the scholarship program. It was for the food pantry. It was for the winter coat drive for kids in the projects. And you took it. You took $400,000 from God's house to pay a bookie. This was the kill shot." In our world, business corruption was a scandal, but stealing from the church was a mortal sin. It was social suicide. It was the kind of stain that never washed out. My mother let out a high-pitched sob and covered her face with her hands. She couldn't look at the board members. She couldn't look at me. She shrank into her chair, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. My father, the man who prided himself on his moral standing, who loved to stand at the pulpit and lecture the youth about responsibility, looked like he had been punched in the gut. His face, usually so composed, turned a deep burning shade of crimson. It started at his neck and rose to his hairline, the blush of ultimate shame. He looked down at his hands, unable to meet the eyes of the people he had known for 30 years. Mrs. Sterling stood up slowly. Her chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. She looked at my father with eyes full of tears and ice. "Desmond," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage, "my grandson is on that scholarship list. We raised that money at bake sales and galas. We trusted you." Desmond did not answer. He couldn't. "I move for the immediate removal of Desmond and Patricia Vance from the board of directors," Mrs. Sterling said, turning to the rest of the table. "And I move that we strip them of all executive titles effective this second," seconded another board member, said instantly. "All in favor," Mrs. Sterling asked. Every single hand in the room went up. Even Robert, the general counsel, raised his hand, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive fallout. It is unanimous, Mrs. Sterling said. She turned to the security guards standing near the wall. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Vance out of the building, and someone get the police to look at that church check. My father finally looked up. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed, and filled with a mixture of hatred and pleading. Maya, he whispered hoarsely, please, don't let them do this. We are your parents. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left me to die on a stage. I looked at the woman who had brought me soup just to manipulate me. I looked at the sister who had live-streamed my downfall for likes. I walked over to the head of the table. I placed my hands on the back of my grandfather's empty chair. You ceased to be my parents the moment you boarded that plane to Paris, I said coldly. You are just defendants now. I turned to the FBI agents. Agents, I said, I believe you have probable cause. The lead agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratcheting metal as he tested them was the only sound in the room. Desmond Vance. Patricia Vance. Connor Sterling, he announced, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. My mother screamed as the agent grabbed her wrist. My father slumped forward, defeated, the shame radiating off him like heat waves. Connor tried to bolt for the side door, but my grandfather had already positioned his wheelchair in the path. He stuck out his cane, and Connor tripped sprawling onto the plush carpet in a heap of expensive fabric and cheap morals. I watched them being cuffed. I watched the tears, the begging, the sheer indignity of it all. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I didn't feel the need to balance the equation. The numbers finally added up. They had subtracted themselves from my life, and the result was peace. The double doors of the boardroom swung open with a finality that made the air in the room vibrate. It was not the catering staff bringing in coffee to smooth over the tension. It was a squad of 6 federal agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering that spelled out FBI Financial Crimes Division. Behind them stood 2 uniformed Chicago police officers. The silence that had filled the room just moments ago was replaced by the heavy rhythmic thud of boots on the carpet. Connor was the first to react. The survival instinct of a desperate man took over. He scrambled backward, knocking his heavy leather chair to the floor with a loud crash. He looked at the side exit, the one reserved for emergency evacuations, and made a break for it. But he forgot who was blocking that path. My grandfather Elijah sat in his wheelchair like a stone sentinel. As Connor lunged past him, Grandpa didn't even flinch. He simply extended his cane, hooking it around Connor's ankle. Connor went down hard. He hit the floor with a grunt, his face slamming into the plush carpet. Before he could scramble back up, 2 agents were on him. They hauled him to his feet, twisting his arms behind his back. The sound of metal handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed off the glass walls. It wasn't me, Connor screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He thrashed against the agent, sweat flying from his forehead. It was Ebony. It was her idea. She wanted the money for the Paris trip. She told me to forge the signature. I was just doing what she said. I looked at my sister. Ebony was sitting frozen in her chair, her phone clutched in her hand. Her face went slack as she heard her husband throw her to the wolves to save his own skin. The love match of the century reduced to finger-pointing in less than 10 seconds. The lead agent walked past Connor and stood in front of my parents. He did not pull out handcuffs for them, not yet. Instead, he pulled out 2 thick envelopes. Desmond and Patricia Vance, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. You are being served with federal indictments for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. You are ordered to surrender your passports immediately. You are not to leave the state of Illinois. A grand jury has been convened, and your arraignment is set for Monday morning. My father took the envelope with trembling hands. He looked at it as if it were a death sentence. For a man like Desmond Vance it was. The public trial, the media circus, the loss of his reputation. It was a fate worse than prison. Then my grandfather cleared his throat. The sound commanded the attention of the entire room. He rolled his wheelchair forward until he was face to face with his son. Desmond, Grandpa said quietly, "Do you remember the morality clause in the original trust documents? The one I wrote when I handed the company over to you 20 years ago?" My father looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad, please," he whispered. "It states that any heir who uses the company assets for criminal activity or brings public shame upon the Vance name is automatically disinherited," Grandpa quoted from memory. "I am triggering that clause today. As of this moment, you are stripped of your shares. You are stripped of your title. And you are stripped of your inheritance." "No," my mother gasped, grabbing my father's arm. "You can't do that. We have nothing else. The house, the cars, it is all tied to the trust." "Then I suggest you start looking for a rental," Grandpa said coldly, "because the locks on the estate are being changed as we speak." The agents began to herd them toward the door. The board members watched, their faces a mixture of shock and relief that they weren't the ones in the crosshairs. As they passed me, my mother stopped. She dug her heels into the carpet, resisting the gentle pressure of the agent's hand on her elbow. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate, her nails digging into my skin. "Maya," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You have to stop this. You can't let them take everything. We are your parents. We are your family." I looked down at her hand holding mine. I remembered the slap she tried to give me in the hospital. I remembered the soup she brought me to manipulate me. I remembered the empty seat at my graduation. I slowly peeled her fingers off my hand one by one. I didn't shove her away. I didn't yell. I just stepped back, putting a definitive distance between us. "No, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You are not family. Family shows up. Family protects. Family doesn't leave you to die on a stage and then steal your money to go to Paris." I looked her in the eye for the last time. "You are just people I used to know," I said. "You are just acquaintances." I turned my back on them. I heard her sob, a raw, broken sound as the agents guided them out of the room. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was shining on Lake Michigan. The water was blue and endless. Behind me, I heard the door click shut, silencing the chaos. I took a deep breath. My heart was beating perfectly, strong, steady, and for the first time in 29 years, it belonged entirely to me. The seasons in Chicago change fast. One minute you are fighting the bitter wind off the lake, and the next the tulips are blooming along Michigan Avenue. It has been exactly 365 days since the doors of that boardroom closed, sealing my former life behind them. A year is a long time. It is enough time for a heart to heal, for a reputation to be rebuilt, and for the mighty to fall so far that you can barely see them from the heights they used to occupy. I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Vance Tower. The view was the same one my father used to boast about, but the energy inside the room was different now. The heavy, oppressive silence of secrets was gone, replaced by the hum of productivity and transparency. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Today was the anniversary of my collapse. I instinctively touched my chest. My heart beat strong and steady, a rhythm of resilience that no longer skipped a beat out of fear. People often ask me what happened to them. They ask with a morbid curiosity, expecting me to be bitter or vindictive. But the truth is, I do not think about them much anymore. I only know their fates because in a city this size, bad news travels faster than good deeds. Connor is currently residing in a federal correctional facility in Terre Haute. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence of 6 years. From what I hear, prison life has been a rude awakening for a man who used to complain if his steak wasn't cooked medium rare. The arrogant smirk that defined him is gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realizes he bet his life on a bluff and lost everything. He sends letters to Ebony, sometimes begging for commissary money, but those letters go unanswered. Ebony has had her own reckoning. When the assets were seized and the accounts frozen, the fantasy life she had curated on Instagram evaporated overnight. The luxury condo, the leased Range Rover, the closet full of designer clothes, the government took it all to pay back the creditors and the IRS. The last time I saw her, it wasn't in person. It was a photo a friend sent me. Ebony was working at a nail salon in a strip mall near the airport. She was bent over a customer's feet scrubbing calluses. She wasn't wearing sunglasses indoors anymore. She wasn't an influencer. She was just a woman learning for the first time in 27 years what it actually means to work for a living. I didn't feel happy when I saw it. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt a sense of balance restoring itself. As for Desmond and Patricia, their fall was perhaps the hardest to witness, not because I pitied them, but because it revealed how hollow they truly were. Without the money, without the company title, without the prestige of being the first family of the church, they simply ceased to exist. They were evicted from the estate 3 months after the arrest. They now live in a 1-bedroom rental apartment in a neighborhood they used to drive through with their doors locked. The community they tried so hard to impress turned its back on them instantly. The church removed my father from the deacon board. The country club revoked their membership. They are pariahs, ghosts haunting a city that has already moved on. My mother reportedly tells anyone who will listen that I am an ungrateful child who stole their legacy, but nobody listens anymore. Their currency was their image, and that currency has been devalued to 0. I checked my watch. It was 7 in the evening. I had a dinner reservation. I packed up my laptop, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office. The security guard, Mr. Henderson, was waiting by the elevator. "Good night, Miss Vance," he said with a genuine smile. "Give my best to your grandfather." "I will, Mr. Henderson," I replied. I met Grandpa Elijah at our favorite steakhouse, a quiet place with leather booths and low lighting. He was already there, sipping an iced tea. He looked better than he had in years. The wheelchair was parked to the side, and he was sitting in the booth reading the financial section of the newspaper. "You are late," he grumbled playfully as I sat down. "I was working, Grandpa." I laughed, kissing him on the cheek. "Someone has to run the empire." He put the paper down and looked at me. His eyes were clear, sharp, and filled with pride. "The quarterly reports look good, Maya. The new scholarship fund you launched is already helping 50 students. You are doing good work. Real work." "It feels good," I admitted. "We are finally solvent. The debt is gone. The reputation is healing." We ordered dinner, and for an hour we didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future. We talked about the new branch opening in Atlanta. We talked about his physical therapy progress. We talked about Luna the cat. It was easy. It was light. It was what family was supposed to feel like. Toward the end of the meal, my phone buzzed on the table. I usually ignore it during dinner, but it buzzed again. And again. A persistent, desperate rhythm. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. I picked it up. A text message popped up. "Maya, please. It's Dad. We are being evicted again. Your mother is sick. We have nowhere to go. Please just call us. We are sorry. We love you. We are family." I stared at the words. A year ago, this text would have broken me. A year ago, I would have rushed to save them. I would have written a check. I would have apologized for their mistakes just to keep the peace. I would have set myself on fire to keep them warm. I looked across the table at Grandpa. He saw the expression on my face. He knew. "They are reaching out, aren't they?" he asked softly. I nodded. He took a sip of his tea. "You have the power to help them, Maya. You can save them right now. They know that. That is why they are calling." I looked back at the phone. I thought about the heart monitor beeping in the empty hospital room. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about the stolen church money. "Helping them doesn't save them, Grandpa," I said quietly. "It just enables them. They have to save themselves. And if they can't, Then that is the path they chose. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't save the number. I pressed the options menu. I scrolled down to the red text that said block caller. I pressed it. Then I deleted the thread. The phone went dark. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or sad. It was liberated. I put the phone back in my purse and looked up at my grandfather. Who was it, he asked, though he already knew the answer. I smiled, and for the first time the smile reached all the way to my soul. Wrong number, I said. Grandpa chuckled and raised his glass. To wrong numbers, he toasted. To right directions, I replied, clinking my glass against his. We finished our meal in peace. As we walked out of the restaurant into the cool Chicago night, I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and possibilities. I walked toward my car, not looking back, not wondering about the people I left behind in the ruins of their own making. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, but I had learned it well. The best revenge is not burning their house down. The best revenge is building your own castle, locking the gate, and living happily ever after inside it. My name is Maya Vance. I am 30 years old. I survived a heart that stopped, and in doing so, I found a life that finally started. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to cut ties to save yourself, please hit the like button and subscribe. Remember, you are the author of your own ending. Make it a good one.